When we think of the Cold War, our minds often jump to images of mushroom clouds, military parades, and spy thrillers. The constant threat of nuclear annihilation, the Berlin Wall, the Cuban Missile Crisis. These are the dramatic hallmarks of the era. But beneath this surface of military tension and high-stakes diplomacy, another war was being waged. A quieter, more insidious conflict fought not with missiles and tanks, but with chess pieces, Olympic medals, and radio waves. This was the silent front of the Cold War, a battle for hearts and minds, for ideological supremacy. It was a contest to prove which system, capitalism or communism, could produce not just the most powerful weapons, but the smartest minds, the strongest athletes, and the most compelling culture. This was psychological warfare, where symbolic victories could resonate louder than any explosion, shaping the beliefs and hopes of millions across a divided world. Today, we're diving deep into this fascinating theater of conflict, exploring how the struggle for global influence was played out in the most unexpected of arenas. In the Soviet Union, the chessboard was far more than just a game. It was a state-sponsored battlefield of the intellect. Chess was woven into the fabric of society, promoted in schools, factories, and pioneer palaces. Why? Because for the Kremlin, chess was a perfect metaphor for strategic thinking and intellectual discipline, qualities they claimed were inherent to the communist system. For decades, this investment paid off spectacularly. An almost unbroken line of Soviet world champions, from Mikhail Botvinnik to Anatoly Karpov, dominated the global chess scene. They weren't just players, they were cultural ambassadors, living proof, in the eyes of the state, of the superiority of the Soviet mind and the socialist system that forged it. Each victory on the 64 squares was framed as a triumph of communist logic and foresight over the perceived chaos and decadence of the West. The Soviet chess machine was a formidable propaganda tool, a dynasty of grandmasters who were tangible symbols of intellectual dominance, reinforcing a narrative of inevitable ideological victory for millions of their citizens. Then, in 1972, this carefully constructed image of invincibility faced its greatest challenge. The stage was set in Reykjavik, Iceland, for a World Chess Championship match that would capture the world's imagination like no other. On one side, the reigning champion, Boris Spassky, the polished, state-supported product of the Soviet chess machine. On the other, the challenger, a volatile, eccentric, and fiercely individualistic genius from Brooklyn, Bobby Fischer. This was not just a chess match. It was capitalism versus communism, individualism versus the collective. A lone American cowboy taking on the entire Soviet empire. The media frenzy was unprecedented. The match became a global spectacle, a proxy battle for the entire Cold War played out move by move. Fischer's behavior was erratic. The stakes were sky high, and at times it seemed the match might not even happen. But when the dust settled, Bobby Fischer had done the unthinkable. Ayod single-handedly defeated the Soviet champion, shattering a myth that had stood for a generation. Fischer's victory was a monumental symbolic blow to the U.S. It proved that a lone, brilliant individual from the West could triumph over the entire state-backed Soviet system. It was a victory that resonated far beyond the chessboard, a powerful piece of propaganda for American individualism and ingenuity. Just as the chessboard became an intellectual battleground, the Olympic Games transformed into a recurring theater for political confrontation. Every 4 years, the world's athletic elite gathered under the banner of sportsmanship. But behind the scenes, the Games were a high-stakes arena for national prestige for the United States and the Soviet Union. The Olympics were a crucial opportunity to showcase the supposed superiority of their respective systems. The final medal count was scrutinized like a war report, a scorecard measuring national strength, vitality, and discipline. Both superpowers poured immense resources into their athletic programs. The state-sponsored Soviet system identified and trained athletes from a young age, while the U.S. leveraged its collegiate sports system and private funding. Every race in the pool, every bout in the boxing ring, and every routine on the gymnastics floor was imbued with ideological significance. The 1980 Moscow Olympics, boycotted by the United States over the invasion of Afghanistan, and the retaliatory Soviet boycott of the 1984 Los Angeles Games, laid bare the political nature of the competition. Sports became a non-lethal substitute for war, where victories were celebrated as proof of a healthier, more dynamic, and ultimately better way of life. beyond the visible arenas of sports and chess. The war for hearts and minds was also fought invisibly, through the air itself. While the Soviet Union worked to create an iron curtain of information, sealing its citizens off from outside influence, the West was determined to punch holes in it. The primary weapons in this airwave offensive were radio stations like Radio Free Europe and Voice of America, funded by the US government. These stations broadcast a steady stream of content deep into Eastern Europe and the Soviet Union. Their programming was a potent mix. They delivered uncensored news, offering an alternative to the tightly controlled state media. They conducted interviews with dissidents and intellectuals, giving a voice to those silenced by their own governments. And, perhaps most subversively, they beamed in Western culture. The sounds of rock and roll, jazz, and pop music became the soundtrack of a forbidden world of freedom and self-expression. For a generation of young people living under communist rule, these broadcasts chipped away at the state's monopoly on truth, fostering skepticism, fueling dissent, and reminding millions of people that another world, another way of thinking, existed beyond their borders. So, what is the lasting legacy of this silent, symbolic warfare? These non-violent confrontations, the chess matches, the Olympic showdowns, the radio broadcasts didn't topple governments overnight or redraw the map of Europe. Their impact was more subtle, but profoundly important. They worked on the psychological level, gradually eroding the confidence and legitimacy of the Soviet system, both at home and abroad. Bobby Fischer's victory showed that the Soviet intellectual machine was not unbeatable. The allure of Western music and culture, broadcast over the airwaves, demonstrated that the capitalist world offered freedoms and pleasures the communist world could not. The Olympic medal races fueled a sense of competition that, in many ways, the centrally planned economies of the East could not sustain. These symbolic victories moved minds, shaped perceptions, and inspired hope. They proved that in the modern age, the power to win an argument, to capture the imagination, and to inspire a dream of freedom can be just as decisive as military might. The Cold War reminds us that the fiercest battles are often fought not for territory, but for the soul. Thanks for watching, and if you enjoyed this look into the hidden history of the Cold War, be sure to like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell for more.